Hey guys, John here. So today's video is slightly different, but I believe it's an important message. Very often we hear that capitalism is a negative force on our society, one that increases inequality, decreases our economic mobility, and basically just strips us down to numbers, to profits. I think that's a huge mistake. I think we have lost the clarity of language that we need, and so I want to clarify that. I believe that our first misstep is the definition of the word. Everyone, well, I won't say everyone, but most people tend to perceive capitalism in a certain political bent. But the truth of it is that capitalism is simply private ownership of the means of production. The private ownership of business. And I think what I believe is that if you take the risk to spend your resources to create something, you should reap benefits from that. Or the lack of benefits from that. If you fail, then the failure should be yours because you were the one that invested the resources and took the risk. And in the same token, if you were the one who invested the resources and took the risk, you should be the one who gains from that. Not the only one necessarily, but that's certainly a huge function of the economy. And so I think it's imperative that creators receive the rewards from what they create, or at least a majority of the rewards from what they create. That's what encourages creators to keep creating. Most of us, I think, recognize that, agree with that. I think the part where we get hung up is that we don't like centralization. We don't like corruption and monopolies, control. That is where we start to think, okay, maybe this is the wrong system because those things shouldn't exist. Those things aren't a force for good. And we equate those things with capitalism. The truth of it, though, is that barriers to competition create the centralization, the monopolization that we associate with capitalism, that we dislike. That dehumanized business is a result of, in my opinion, the delocalization of business. And that results from decreased competition. When you don't have local options in an industry, then the outsiders, the large company that walks in, can take the market share. And that's obviously going to have a massive effect on the amount of corruption, the amount of control that's exerted on that industry. So if we want those deeper connections with businesses, if we want more decentralization and more local oversight, more community involvement, then we need to pursue increased competition. That can only occur if the means of creation are in private hands. The moment that we cede business to government, we artificially centralize the industry in question, adding roadblocks to competition. Or at least we put it on the path. It's a much more centralized path. And the solution shouldn't be less freedom. The solution is more freedom. The relegation of responsibility to governments and large corporations is what got us here. We ceded our responsibilities in our local communities to centralized organizations. And when we did, these problems got a lot worse. So we have to do our best to ensure that our local community has the competition that makes our community better. If we look to these centralized organizations, they will fail us. That corruption will return. It's just human nature. So how do we label the solution? Like, what do we call that? If we're pursuing like clarity of language, let's say, I'm not certain that I have a perfect answer to that, but to me, I see it as somewhat of a dichotomy between distributed value and non-distributed value. When we are creating value, or the means to create value, are we creating them in a way that centralizes over time or decentralizes over time? Are we creating these products or these tools of creation in ways that a small amount of individuals can control them more fully, or that the control cedes to more and more people over time? That's the big question. And I think that's the key to the solution. The concept of the distributed ledger that came with Bitcoin, it was revolutionary. Why? Why was it so revolutionary? Because it had the capability to do that with finance, something that has been centralized for thousands of years. Whenever finance became decentralized, governments and centralized organizations stepped in to re-centralize it. So for the first time in history, we have something that can't be controlled. It can only be banned or blacklisted, but they can't change it because it's immutable. So, or at least it's very difficult to change those systems. Let's put it that way. So whether we're living in a society where the means of production or the tools of value creation are owned by the government or by private individuals, the core of the solution, in my opinion, is a design choice. Are we designing these systems to centralize over time or to decentralize over time? That's the rough basis. Humanity tends towards centralization by default. But with the right designs, we can slow that progression towards centralization. And we can start closer to the decentralized end of the spectrum. Nothing is fully decentralized. It's very difficult to do that. But we can get close. And my personal belief is that private ownership is not just a more effective model for human prosperity, but inherently moral. I believe that delegating business and value creation to a centralized authority takes us in the wrong direction and makes it a lot harder to create value in a healthy way. Don't get me wrong. I completely agree that value creation can continue and grow under centralized authorities. But due to the forced lack of free competition, value creation will always be less in a centralized system than it could be in a less centralized system. Centralization works well for exploiting value in an existing resource, in an existing way. But it suffers greatly when you consider innovation and progress. So those are my basic thoughts. And I really wanted to address this issue because it's been such a common theme I've been seeing. People associate capitalism with these negative trends that we see in our society. And again, like, this is all well and good, but how does this apply to our lives? How can we use this in our day-to-day? I think if we know what the solution is, if we consider decentralization of value to be, or value creation, to be a worthy goal, which it certainly is for me. I think the more you study history, the more clear that becomes. Then investing in projects that are doing that are offering those decentralized solutions that enable people to gain more individual control over their lives. Supporting those is important, but not at the risk of our own welfare. We're ultimately, when we're investing to improve our lives. And so we don't just want to be donating to other people's ideas, or even ideas that we hold, that we share. We still shouldn't be just throwing money at people because they share those ideas. So we need to find those projects that are doing the types of things that we want to see created, but that have lower risk, the ones that are more likely to succeed. I don't want to take a gamble on long shots, at least not with a large percentage of my portfolio. I think we all can agree we want human prosperity. And freedom of creation is the largest driving force behind prosperity that we have ever seen in human history. There is no other force that even comes close. The more you look into it, the more that just pops right out at you. The most economically free nations are among the highest in GDP per capita, in innovation, in being central to global business. Economic freedom is integral. You can be a prosperous nation by having a ton of resources. Absolutely. You know, you can be the most prosperous nation just by virtue of the resources you have. Sure. But if you're economically free, it's a multiplier. It's a massive, massive force multiplier, unlike anything else we've seen. Those metrics are clear. And too often today, we find ourselves using new definitions for words. Definitions that were assigned by people who almost always have a political agenda. And whether that agenda is right or wrong, whether we agree with it or not, we need clarity of language. We need language that represents the truth of the issues that we're looking at. Capitalism has been an immense force for prosperity in the past, and it's going to continue to be in the future. But capitalism is not collusion between large companies and governments to make legislation that favors certain companies and makes it harder for competition. That is not capitalism. It never was. It never will be. It's the exact opposite. It's the centralization of control, not the private ownership. That's the big lie that we've been fed. It's seemingly like over the past 50 years, and maybe longer than that. But I know this isn't exactly my typical type of content, but it's a topic that I feel really deeply about, and it's something I've talked with a few close friends about recently, and it was just on my mind, and I felt like I should share this with you. Freedom isn't just right. It's the most powerful force for good that exists on our planet. We don't need to control each other's lives. We don't need to protect each other from mistakes. We can protect against injustices and let everyone freely compete. We need to start stepping up in ways that enable, when we need to start creating. And when we create, we need to create things that enable more value creation in the future. And if we aren't creating those things, we need to at least be supporting the creation of those things. And by that, I don't mean donating your money and just giving away value to people because they hold those ideas. But anyway, thank you guys for watching. I hope you got something from this. I really appreciate your viewership. I'll catch you guys later. All right. Okay. So if you stuck around, I want to reiterate that if you haven't already started producing the things that your family needs, now might be the time. Food, water, electricity. It's much better to have something than nothing. If you have a postage stamp of a garden, still better than not having a garden. Chickens and a basic garden is a super simple way to ensure that you have food. Doesn't take much space. You can at least get something there. It's about to get rough here. There's a lot of problems with food production, food reserves, and we're having massively decreased fertilizer production and distribution around the globe. That's going to thrust us into, I believe, a global famine. And I think we should all be prepared. Whether that's food stores, I think 6 months of food storage is not a bad idea. Rice, beans, whatever you can muster. Just stay safe out there, guys. Weather the storm that's coming and rely on your family and your friends for support. We're gonna make it and we're gonna thrive. Keep it up, guys. I'll catch you later.